straightforward conversation with Gary Hunter. My guest tonight is Michael Hunter, Lieutenant and Commanding Officer of the Athens Post of the State Highway Patrol. Michael went to the Ohio Highway Patrol Academy in 1974 and upon graduation was posted at Toledo. In 1987 he was promoted to sergeant, went to Xenia, Ohio as assistant post commander, and in 1994 he was promoted to lieutenant and came to the Athens Post as post commander. In 1992 he headed the newly created drug interdiction team for 18 counties in southwest Ohio, and during his career he's apprehended nearly 1,500 DUI violators. Tonight's topic is the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Good evening, Michael.
Good evening.
I'd like you to start off tonight's discussion by just kind of generally describing for our audience what the general purpose of a highway patrol division is in Ohio.
Well, naturally it depends on who you ask, but our mission out there is to really make the streets and highways safer for all motorists using them, and to investigate and take care of crime on state property.
What are if I wanted to become a member of the State Patrol, what would be the requirements for even being considered for such a position?
Well, you would have to be a high school graduate at least. You'd have to be in excellent physical condition. You would have to pass a background examination, psychological testing, polygraph, physical testing, some things like that. It's a fairly lengthy process, and currently we're not hiring, but when we are hiring, a pool of 2,000 people is selected from testing, and there's a lottery system in which a person gets assigned a number by a computer, and they begin testing from number 1. If you're number 2,000, you're unlikely to be considered in any single year, but each year they start over again before they start going with the next class.
So it's fairly competitive in Ohio then. It's a fairly sought-after job.
Well, it is somewhat competitive. When I came on, we figured that 1 out of every 38 persons who took the test eventually became a highway patrolman.
In Ohio, what is the essential jurisdiction for the State Patrol? Is it just on the state highways and in the state of Ohio, or do you have broader jurisdiction?
Our jurisdiction is somewhat broader than that. On the Ohio Turnpike, we are state police. On all other highways and streets in the state, we have jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction on all state-owned and leased properties, and that includes prisons, the universities, state parks, and places like the state office tower, the state fairgrounds.
You mentioned prisons, and it came to mind here when we had the Lucasville riot here a few years ago that I remember seeing the State Patrol entering that picture. Mm-hmm. Are you primarily responsible for that, and if so, how do you handle those situations?
Well, the primary responsibility lies with the Corrections Department, but we are the chief investigative arm of the state. We do the investigations on all major crimes within state institutions, including Hocking Correctional Facility up by Nelsonville, and even the Southeast Psychiatric Hospital here in Athens. At Lucasville, we were the primary agency having to deal with the riot there. Now, we weren't the only agency by any means. There were lots of other people involved, but our higher up echelon people were there advising at all times. We were providing security for the perimeter. We prepared to take it back by force if necessary, and when it was all over, we processed the people who came out, and then the mountains of evidence and debris that were left behind.
Is there specialized training then that State Patrol officers receive for handling riot situations? Are you kind of the elite force in Ohio for dealing with riots?
I don't know if we're an elite force, but we are all trained in handling riot situations. Every autumn and every spring we do training in along with our qualifying our service weapons. We receive in-service training from time to time, and of course we have our special response team, which I would consider highly specialized in their training.
Yeah, do you have a force that is able to deal with the special problems of a riot, for instance, the use of horses and those kind of things?
No horses. We have a couple of helicopters. We have people who are trained to repel from them. We have some equipment that can be used to help us out in a situation like that. Certain people are trained in it. There are a group of people who train almost constantly to deal with things like that. We look at situations that have happened in other states. We gather intelligence from all sorts of places like that to learn how to deal with that sort of thing. And there are certain people who get the benefits of all that training, and all of us get the benefit of quite a bit of that training. If necessary, any one of us could be called from the superintendent on down to the newest trooper from the 127th class.
Am I correct in stating that as a general rule you would not respond to assistance in, say, the city of Athens? That really wouldn't be within your jurisdiction to do, but you might respond to a situation at Ohio University?
While we have direct jurisdiction on Ohio University, as you know, they have their own police force, and they handle almost, well, since I've been here, they have handled absolutely everything there, and they normally do. We can respond in the city of Athens, and we did a few weekends ago when there was just a little bit of trouble, mainly showing up and being there just in case somebody needed us. But if an officer is directly threatened, he can ask us to come in to any place, and we have the right and authority to go assist that person.
So you have jurisdiction essentially then in all areas of any other law enforcement agency in the state of Ohio, or maybe even broader?
Sure, if we're asked. The governor can designate us to do certain other additional things, such as guard dignitaries. The President of the United States comes in, or a foreign dignitary, then we, if he so designates, we have full authority there. And in certain riot situations, if the mayor of Athens, for instance, had a tremendous riot or something and asked for it, the governor can designate that authority on us. But that doesn't happen very often, fortunately.
I'd like to get into a little bit of the mechanics for the audience's information on how things are done. What do you consider, and obviously the most frequent thing that at least I'm familiar with that State Patrol does, visible thing, is to make arrests for driving under intoxicated on state highways, or at least in Athens County. That's the thing I see most frequently. What do you consider probable cause for a stop when you're out there on the road?
Well, any violation of any law out there on the highway is grounds for stopping somebody. I wouldn't necessarily call a speeding violation probable cause to arrest for DUI, but the officer, having stopped a speeder, may detect certain other things about that person that lead him to believe that there might be further problems here. Naturally, the odor of beer in the car, or seeing the cans sitting in there, or something like that, the odor of alcoholic beverages on the person's breath, slurred speech, flushed face, evasiveness, and a number of other things will give him cause to inquire further. We'll give them divided attention skills tests. See how they do on those. See how they can have the ability to perform more than one thing at the same time. So it's kind of like the old walking and chewing gum thing. A person under the influence has more problems with coordinating more than one activity at the same time than a person who has not been drinking.
Well, stay tuned. Mike and I will be back after this commercial break. When we come back, I want to ask Mike to walk us through an arrest for DUI and what a person that's been arrested can expect to happen to them. Welcome back to Straightforward Conversation. Michael, I'd like to ask you to walk the audience through what a individual might expect to happen to them in a typical situation if they've been stopped on the road and you now have decided that you're going to complete an arrest for potential DUI.
Sure. Typically, let us call it a normal DUI arrest, not somebody who's giving us a tremendous amount of problems, but the average citizen who has had a few too many and is out there. The person is first going to find themselves sitting alongside the highway with one of us behind them, And naturally, that's going to make them nervous. We're going to come up and we're going to ask certain questions like we normally would. Driver's license, registration, proof of insurance, please. Then we're going to talk to them about what they've been doing, what they've been doing wrong, which attracted our attention in the first place. And we're probably going to ask them some questions about what they've been consuming. Now, most of the people that we stop who have been consuming some alcohol are not under the influence. And through this process, we wean those out and send them on their way down the road. But if I'm not necessarily satisfied with the answers, I'll go a little bit farther. For instance, getting them out of the car, taking them back to a safe place off the road, asking them some more questions, seeing how they respond, seeing if they're forthright, seeing how their speech is. Is it slurred? Do they not know where they are? Are they going someplace which is in a different direction? We'll look at their eyes and see how they're focusing, see how their eyes are reacting to light. We'll give them a test that we call a check for horizontal gaze nystagmus, which is something that they cannot control, but is often an indicator of alcohol use. Then we'll put them through a few tests. We'll divide their attentions, have them count, listen to directions, and perform a test at the same time. See if they can do more than one thing at a time. And we've correlated that over the years in experiments and what you might call empirical evidence that a certain amount of mistakes corresponds to a person who is more than likely under the influence of alcohol. To a certain point, sometimes we can say an 87% chance. That person is then going to be informed that he or she is under arrest for operating while under the influence. They will be searched, they will be handcuffed 99% of the time, and they'll be secured in the car. Now, depending on the number of offenses, their car may be towed. If it is towed, we will inventory it to make sure that that person gets all of their property back. When we're finished with that, provided we don't stumble across some evidence in the car or something like that, that person's going to be transported to a highway patrol post or a police station somewhere and given the opportunity to take a breath test or perhaps a urine test, depending. After the test will naturally show us how much alcohol there is in their breath. If it's a urine test, we'll get the results back later.
Could you describe for the audience how the breath test is conducted? A lot of people may not be familiar with that.
It's very simple. All we do is set the machine up, and the machine tells us when to have the person blow. It gives us a signal, both a beeping sound, and prints it right out on the thing to tell us to have the person blow. All they do is blow. It takes maybe 8 seconds. When they're done blowing and they relax, the machine automatically samples the air and it prints out a test result. And we'll give them a copy of that test result.
Is there a time frame in which you must administer this test after you've made the arrest?
We have 2 hours after the violation itself occurs.
If somebody is not able to muster enough wind to blow the breathalyzer, what would you do?
Well, I've never really seen that happen. I've had some people pretend that it happened, but they were giving me all sorts of other indicators that that just wasn't the case. If a person refuses to cooperate, they are refusing the test, and there are added penalties, especially with the driver's license and fees that they have to pay to get it back, tacked right on top of that. They can lose their license the same way as DUI, even if they're not convicted.
So if I'm being a little uncooperative, I'm the person in this situation, I'm not really fully cooperating, what might you say to me or do to get me to cooperate before you would put on the form that I refused to test?
Well, I'm a pretty reasonable guy myself, and I'll coach you, and I'll coach you for quite a while to get you to blow properly into that machine. Now, either you eventually will, or you'll eventually indicate to me that you're not going to do it anymore, which is an out-and-out refusal. But if you cooperate and sooner or later give me a test sample, then I'll have a test sample to use against you in court. That's what it's for. And the state clearly wants people to blow into the machine. That's why they set up the sanctions for not blowing. Now, every once in a while... Do you inform
them what the sanctions are?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And that's a quite lengthy thing, which I cannot recite for you possibly.
Can you give in general terms to the public here what they might expect to happen to them if they, I think there's, for instance, the automatic license suspension for, I think it's up to 6 months or more now, and that you can face. Is there other possibilities?
Sure. And it depends. If you have refused before, the penalties go up. A first refusal is a certain amount, a year. A second refusal is a couple of years. A third refusal is 3 years. And beyond that, it's a 5-year, simply for refusing to blow into that machine. You have given your consent to blow in that machine by signing for your driver's license in the first place, and it says so right on the application.
So Ohio has taken a very proactive stance there. That they're really encouraging people to cooperate in the investigation of DUIs.
Well, the state law is set up that way. I'm not sure that all the defense attorneys agree with that, though.
Well, I'm a prosecutor side of the table, so
Well,
I think that at least there's some incentive there now for people to cooperate.
Well, there has been all along. Unfortunately, it's applied differently in every court.
Okay, now I've gone beyond this stage, and you've determined that you're going to file charges against me for driving under the influence. What would happen to me at this point in time? What would happen to my car that's still presumably sitting out there on the road?
Well, if your car is sitting out on the road because you're a first-time offender, we'll give you every opportunity to get somebody else to come pick you up, provided you live fairly local. And to get somebody to drive your car, provided you don't drive it, because your driver's license goes into the court for the judge to take control of. If your car has been towed, then all you have to do is get a release from us, unless it's a second or third DUI offense, and then it's up to the judge.
Well, stay tuned. Mike and I will return after this commercial break. When we return, I want to ask Mike about drugs and how the State Highway Patrol investigates those situations. Welcome back to Straightforward Conversation. Michael, I'd like to change topics a little bit now and have you briefly discuss drugs and the role of the State Patrol in investigating illegal use of drugs and selling of drugs, transporting of drugs. How do you fit into that overall picture of enforcement?
Well, we discovered an interesting thing. Actually, the New Jersey State Police did, by accident. A guy getting done with 2 years' worth of investigations walked into his station house one day with a lot of paperwork and looked over, and there was a trooper sitting there with 24 pounds of dope. He said, "Good Lord, where'd you get that?" And he said, "Well, out there in a car." Well, we found out a long time ago, or we should have figured out a long time ago, that most dope gets places by transportation of some sort. Well, we don't have that many people walking around on our highways, so obviously it's being transported by car and truck and boat and train and planes. Well, we have jurisdiction over the people on the highways, so we began the early interdiction efforts down in Florida began with a profiling, where they were looking for, at the time, the black driver driving the fancy car and lots of heavy gold jewelry and things like that, and they made that very successfully. That profile totally went out the window, and the drug transporter groups realized that. Now we're finding them on everybody. We have stopped, and I've been personally involved in stops involving infants under the age of 3 months years old in the car, people up to the age of 67 years old driving. We're talking motorhomes, tractor trailers, motorcycles, minibuses, you name it, it's being transported in it. There's no profile of anybody. So we had to think about other ways to look at this, and many of the ways that we've developed have proven very successful. In '93, when I was still on the drug interdiction team, my people took more than a ton of marijuana off the road and almost a half a ton of cocaine, $250,000 cash, just from people driving on Ohio highways in southwestern Ohio.
What would you look for that would make you suspect that somebody driving down the highway in a motorhome or other vehicle might be transporting drugs?
Well, I'll pick on one motorhome in which we found 500 pounds of cocaine. The officer was out there just running radar, and the motorhome went by too fast. right behind him, within one car length, was a car, and both of them had Nevada plates. Not that that's usual for us. In fact, I think those are the only two Nevada plates we've seen. He stopped both of them at the same time. The car was following clearly too closely, and the driver of the motorhome, who turned out to be a 56-year-old woman, was watching him in the rearview mirror and just weaving all over the road. So he stopped them both, and the guy in the back car said he was following them somewhere for a certain purpose. When he went up to talk to the lady, she gave a totally different story on where they were going and why. And another man got out of the motorhome to stretch, he said, and he had a third story. Now, that doesn't make sense. I generally know where I'm going, and so does my wife. And anybody else traveling with us knows where we're going, what our reason is, even if it's just driving around. They asked a few other questions, got a drug-sniffing canine out there. The canine took one look at the vehicle and took a few more sniffs and gave the indication that there clearly was something that he was trained to observe here, which happens to be cocaine, marijuana, hashish, heroin, or methamphetamine, and hit on the vehicle. And a short search later, we had the largest cocaine seizure ever in the state on the highways.
Is the use of dogs then probably your primary way of verification if you don't have other probable cause to do a complete search?
It's a good way. It is a really valuable tool for us. We have about 15 canines around the state, and they have paid for themselves time and again. But really, the biggest tool out there is the officer. An officer who's willing to ask the questions, who's smart enough to make the observations and correlate them, and gutsy enough to ask for permission to search for cars. It is astounding to me, has been astounding to me ever since the first time I did it, that a person carrying illegal substances in his car would actually give me permission to search the car. But they do time and time and time again. I've never had anybody refuse.
Even if they have drugs in the car?
Even if they had drugs in the car.
Power of persuasion, huh?
Whatever it is, it works. And I understand that occasionally it doesn't work, but it has worked very well for me.
And I believe, too, currently under Ohio law, if you're transporting drugs in a vehicle, whether or not you own that vehicle, it is subject to forfeiture now, or potential forfeiture.
Well, you're the lawyer. Potentially it's forfeitable if the owner has any knowledge that it's being used for that, certainly. There are rental cars out there. We don't take the rental company's cars. And there's horror stories about there of people taking cars for a seed of marijuana. We don't do that. You know, clearly
you're not after the cars in particular, then?
No, we really just want to stop the drugs. Contrary to some people's opinion, this stuff is dangerous. It shouldn't be out there.
In the time we have remaining, I'm going to change gears again with you, and we don't have too much time left to talk about this topic, but it's the topic of vehicle inspections, which is more of a safety kind of issue. It seems to me that there have been less vehicle inspections, at least in Athens County, in the last 3 or 4 years than I remember there being in, say, the 3 or 4 years preceding that. Am I right in that assertion? And if I'm not, what is going on in that arena?
Well, I can't say what was going on before I got here in '94. I do know that for a period there was practically nobody assigned to this post because of a period of promotions and people retiring, things like that. But of course I can do something about that. I'm sort of the boss.
Yeah,
I can tell them to go out and inspect things. Inspections are up in this.
By the way, I'm not asking for an inspection of my car either right now. But
we can fix you up. We are out there. Our motor vehicle inspection teams now have a central place to inspect cars for salvage operation, school buses, church buses, and things like that. And it has freed up the teams to go back out there and do their random motor vehicle inspections. And we did one right out here at 33 in Richland just yesterday.
So that people can expect that there will be inspections continue to be done on vehicles, and they should keep them in good working order and in safe condition primarily.
Yeah, not because of us, but because it's safe for their own people riding with them, their children and their grandparents and sisters. We want everybody to be safe out there. We don't always give tickets when we find things wrong. The more flagrant, the more likely, of course, but we understand the problems of people's limited incomes and things like that, they have to understand that even poor people can get hurt out there, and we're fighting to keep that from happening.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been a very interesting conversation. This has been Straightforward Conversation with Garry Hunter, and good evening.